You're right, my front wheel skids. How are we? Call this episode episode 2 of from Bethnal Green to YouTube. The 80s to 90s. I had to re-immerse myself in the 80s historic events at the time. There's a lot us kids blocked out with historic events. I went through them and it's monotonous and it's too nostalgic to go through, from being a 6-year-old to being a 16-year-old in London. A lot of us suffered with PTSD if you come from Tower Hamlets, Hackney, Tottenham, Haringey, especially if you was a kid on the streets at the time. It wasn't a very nice place. People didn't hide things so much in the 80s and 90s. There used to be, it was like living that decade wasn't learning. It was like life lessons. I grew up being streetwise, like a lot of kids from the poorer boroughs. Seeing prostitution from an early age, seeing drug deals from an early age, seeing the older friends that we used to play football with die from heroin overdoses at an early age. Cocaine hit big time in the middle of the 80s. That was nothing new. Drugs, crime, street life, wasn't nothing new. It was like you'd been brought up to be streetwise by your previous generations, especially the older generations who went through 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, because they was the generations who looked after us, and nans and granddads looked after us, and they bred into you that streetwiseness. Not so much your mums and dads, because they'd grown up in a sort of post-World War II climate where they was a bit more sensible, a little bit more not streetwise enough, a bit more sheltered. I think it was a protectiveness of their mums and dads in World War II that made them like that. So our generation, the 70s kids who grew up in teenage years in the 80s to 90s decade, I think we learned a lot more. We went through having no social media to the end of the 80s, people walking about with bricks and filofaxes. You had people becoming millionaires overnight, didn't you? You have entrepreneurs, the yuppies, from places that we used to throw bricks about has been built up into Canary Wharf, and you know, you could go down Liverpool Street on a Saturday afternoon, it'd be dead, and then all of a sudden it was buzzing. Shoreditch, the same thing. Nowadays, Shoreditch used to be a no-go zone for a lot of people during the 80s and 90s. In the 90s, it was dead. I'll be honest with you, Shoreditch, it was nothing like it is today. Party capital of London. It was nothing like that. People would shit themselves if they had to go home at 11 o'clock at night and you had to walk down Brick Lane. They would absolutely wet the bed. I had friends who used to come out with me, go up the West End, and there was no way they would come back to Bethnal Green, to my house, to listen to music or chill out. You know, it was always they was a bit naive. And some of these people lived not far from Bethnal Green. They lived Angel, Islington. But Bethnal Green always had that name for itself as being slightly more, how can you say in a nice way, it was nasty. It was a nasty place. You could be all right 1 minute, the next minute something mental would happen. I suppose, I don't know what places in America you can liken it to, if you're an American. You can liken it to, I suppose, what we would call, from watching American films and American culture, it was like the Bronx. That's what Bethnal Green, Tower Hamlets was like, the Bronx of London. To me, that's what it felt like, the Bronx of London. Because whenever I went anywhere, I wasn't scared. I was streetwise. I knew the score. I knew what roads not to walk down. When something looked proper dodgy, mate, you know, you'd learn to steer clear. You'd be streetwise as hell. But that decade, I said to my missus, it's either a decade that you want to forget, but you love to remember. It was the most weirdest decade ever. Social changes, cultural changes, moral changes. It was just totally freaking you out. You learnt one thing at the start of the 80s, and by the end of the night, and by the end of the 80s, you learnt one thing. No, let's get this right. By the start of the 80s, you had a totally different cultural system till the end of the 80s. It was totally different. It was morally, and culturally, it was changing. It was the most obvious change I think any decade had since the war. You could sod all that hippie shit from the 60s, the 70s with its glam rock and everyone listening to soul music. Them 80s to the 90s was just so diverse and eclectic, culturally, morally, socially, politically. It was crazy. You had the Thatcher years, which everyone started having a moan about in the middle of the 80s, because they could see that it was the start, it was the decline of politics as everyone knew it. They was always Billy bullshitters, the politicians, wasn't they? But not like in this day and age. We grew up with, I mean, if you take, for instance, the media of the time, we grew up with the Rolf Harrises, Jimmy Saviles, you know, the Philip Schofields on TV. And now look at all the stories that have come out about these people. You know, our granddads were telling us when Jimmy Savile was on TV, he's not right, that geezer. You know what I mean? He's not right. That Rolf Harris, he ain't right. They was right, wasn't they? That MP, he's not right. Our granddads, they knew exactly what, our grandmothers and granddads knew exactly what was going on. But that 10 years was like, not so much a decade of the past, it was lessons in life that you'll never forget, and that would have your back up until now. I'm 51, and still those lessons that I learned from that decade still stick with me, and I still live my life by being that streetwise. It's crazy to think when you was that little. Now I've got kids of my own. Mate, I'd never have thought that I would never let my 8-year-old go out on a tangent and say, I'll come in before dark. We was everywhere and anywhere. London was your playground. And I'm not just saying London was your I mean the whole of London was your playground. You could get a red bus Rover, a travel card at the time. You could go on any bus, any train. You in an hour you could be at Gatwick, Heathrow, and your mum wouldn't know where you was. Just come in before dark. Perhaps it was naive of them, or perhaps they knew, because we was from Bethnal Green, we were streetwise. I think a lot of it is our parents were naive and trusted us too much, to be honest with you. a lot of the times I find myself in weird parts of London and weird bus numbers and thinking to myself, how the F am I going to get home from here? You know what I mean? What a decade though, what a mental decade. At the end of the 80s saw music totally change. Everyone got into rock music, and the undercurrent was acid house with the raves. You had warehouse parties in abandoned places in East London. People were getting into their music big time. Ease started getting into the equation. So everyone was taking the big C up until the acid house parties, and everyone got into the ecstasies and stuff like that. What a strange era that was, from one to the other. All in 10 years, that society totally changed. And I'm glad to have been part of that. I'm glad to have been part of that 10 years where I was a teenager. That's 11 minutes now. I'll leave the rest to the next episode. Have a good one. Baked potato. God bless, and thanks for watching this little mini series thing. I just thought I'd diversify the channel a bit, and just so you know where I'm coming from, because a lot of people just seem to see you on YouTube as a content creator or someone who talks about this, talks about that. I see a few comments that have led me to doing these videos, because one of them said about anyone can learn a bit of the Cockney rhyming slang. Yeah, anyone can learn a bit of the Cockney rhyming slang. But when you're born in Whitechapel, you come from Bethnal Green, I wanted to give you subscribers, a bit of a background on it, because it's real talk. We've always spoke real talk on this channel, and we'll keep it that way. You can't beat being honest. It's like a shield. If you're honest on YouTube, it's like a shield. People find you dangerous when you're honest and you just say how it is. And I'd like you subscribers, you viewers, to know that I just don't do it for YouTube. I've lived it. Have a good one and take care. And as I said, God bless.